In the grand halls of Europe's most powerful dynasties, a silent terror reigned. It wasn't the fear of assassins or the threat of invasion. It was a disease, a secret so shameful it could unravel entire empires. This is the story of the royal plague that was hidden behind a wall of silence, and why nobody dared to speak its name: Syphilis. Before it was called syphilis, it went by many other, much nastier names. In England, it was the French disease. To the French, it was the Neapolitan disease. The Russians called it the Polish disease, and the Turks the Christian disease. Everyone agreed on two things: it was agonizing, and it was definitely someone else's fault. They called it the Great Pox, a terrifying cousin to smallpox, and when it first exploded across Europe in the late 15th century, caused by the bacterium Treponema pallidum, syphilis is a disease of stages. It starts innocently enough, with sores and a rash. But then it vanishes, retreating into the body for years, sometimes decades. This latent stage is its most insidious trick, because when it comes back with a vengeance. In its final tertiary stage, it attacks the body from the inside out. It can eat away at the bones, disfiguring the face, until noses and palates collapse. It can attack the heart and blood vessels, and most terrifyingly, it can invade the central nervous system, leading to what we now call neurosyphilis. This brought on dementia, delusions, violent fits of rage, and a slow, agonizing descent into madness. A condition that made it known as the Great Imitator, for its ability to mimic other illnesses. For the royals of Europe, a syphilis diagnosis wasn't just a death sentence, it was a political catastrophe. To get why this disease had to be hidden at all costs, you have to understand just how fragile royal power really was. A monarch's body wasn't their own, it was a symbol of the nation's health. And their bloodline was the single most important guarantee of stability. Syphilis threatened all of it. First, there was the stigma. The disease was tangled up with sexual promiscuity, something no monarch who claimed to rule by divine right could be associated with. Being publicly afflicted with a shameful disease shattered the eye of moral purity and divine favor, handing a perfect weapon to any rival who wanted to argue the king was unfit to rule. Second, and maybe most critically, it posed a direct threat to the dynasty. Syphilis in women could lead to infertility, miscarriages, and stillborn children. A king who couldn't produce a healthy male heir was a king whose legacy was doomed. If word got out that the royal bloodline was tainted, it could ignite brutal succession crises, inviting challenges from ambitious cousins or foreign powers. And so, the great conspiracy of silence began. Royal physicians became masters of deception, sworn to secrecy. Official records would mention gout, rheumatism, or a lingering fever, while the truth was whispered only in the most private chambers. Access to an ailing monarch was tightly controlled, as courtiers worked tirelessly to spin public narratives, blaming a king's madness or a queen's tragic miscarriages on anything but the horrifying truth. It was a matter of state security, and the silence was deafening. Our story of royal syphilis begins, as it did for many Europeans, with King Charles VIII of France. In 1494, the ambitious young king marched his army of 50,000 soldiers into Italy to claim the throne of Naples. His campaign was, at first, a stunning success. But as his troops and their many camp followers celebrated their victory, a new horrifying illness erupted among them. It started with sores, then progressed to agonizing pains and foul-smelling abscesses. The epidemic was so devastating that it crippled Charles's army, forcing a retreat. As his infected mercenary soldiers disbanded and returned home all across Europe, they took the disease with them. Within 5 years, what became known as the French pox had spread from Italy to Germany, Switzerland, and England, eventually reaching as far as Russia and India. While Charles VIII himself died a few years later from an accidental head injury, his Italian campaign is remembered for unleashing one of the first great pandemics of the early modern world. He didn't invent the disease, but he became the man who unwittingly unleashed it upon the thrones of his royal cousins for the next 400 years. Perhaps no monarch's story is more defined by the desperate need for a male heir than that of King Henry VIII of England. His 6 wives are famous, but his frantic marital carousel was driven by an obsession with securing the Tudor dynasty. This obsession has led to one of history's most persistent rumors. Was Henry himself the reason his wives kept failing to deliver a healthy son? The theory that Henry had syphilis is tantalizing. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, suffered a heartbreaking series of miscarriages and infant deaths, a pattern that some have tried to link to congenital syphilis. And later in life, Henry was plagued by oozing leg ulcers and a dramatic personality shift, transforming from a charming prince into an obese, paranoid tyrant. But here's the thing. Most modern historians believe the syphilis theory just doesn't hold up. There is no record of Henry ever showing the key early symptoms, nor was he ever treated with mercury, the standard agonizing cure of the day. Taking a mercury cure required being out of the public eye for weeks, something a king couldn't hide. His infamous leg ulcers were far more likely caused by varicose veins or a bone infection from an old jousting injury. In the world of royal power, however, the truth is often less important than the rumor. The fear of syphilis, the terrifying possibility that the king's blood was tainted, would explain his desperation, his willingness to break with the Catholic Church, and his cruelty to the women he blamed for his dynastic failures. On the other side of Europe, another monarch's reign was descending into a nightmare of paranoia and violence. Ivan IV of Russia, known to history as Ivan the Terrible, is the textbook definition of a tyrant. His reign was marked by fits of uncontrollable rage and mass executions. But was this pure evil, or was it a symptom of a diseased mind? One compelling, though debated theory is that Ivan's infamous temper may have been fueled by neurosyphilis, his behavior. This theory gained ground in the 1960s, when his remains were exhumed and scientists found dangerously high levels of mercury in his bones, suggesting he was likely undergoing the brutal mercury treatment for syphilis. But here's the cruel irony. The treatment may have been as damaging as the disease. Mercury poisoning itself can cause severe neurological and psychiatric symptoms, including irritability and psychosis. So Ivan may have been trapped in a horrific feedback loop, where the disease drove him to a toxic cure, and the cure amplified his madness. The terror he unleashed, including the infamous incident where he murdered his own son in a fit of rage, may not have been the actions of a sane leader. They may have been the tragic, bloody outcome of a brain being ravaged by disease and poison. The conspiracy of silence had consequences that rippled across centuries, shaping the map of Europe. The desperate need to conceal the disease often made everything worse. In an effort to keep bloodlines pure and avoid politically risky marriages, many royal houses, like the mighty Habsburgs, turned inward, marrying cousins. This inbreeding was already creating a host of genetic problems, like the infamous Habsburg jaw. When combined with a secret syphilis epidemic passed from one generation to the next, it created a perfect storm of hereditary weakness that hollowed out dynasties from the inside. A monarch's failure to produce an heir because he had rendered his wife infertile with the disease could create massive political instability. For example, when Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI died without a son in 1740, it plunged the continent into the bloody war of the Austrian succession, as other powers tried to challenge his daughter Maria Theresa's right to rule. The silence also had a social cost. To deflect from the rampant infection among the elite, authorities often scapegoated marginalized groups, particularly sex workers, who were subjected to increased persecution. The palace needed a villain, and it was far easier to blame the poor and powerless than to admit the truth. The pox was in the palace, on the throne, and under the crown. In the age of kings, power was built on a foundation of physical perfection, moral purity, and a healthy bloodline. Syphilis shattered that desire. It was a disease that no amount of gold or divine right could guard against. It revealed the fundamental fragility of power, showing how a microscopic organism could threaten to topple empires, redraw maps, and plunge nations into chaos. The grand conspiracy of silence, orchestrated in the gilded halls of Europe, wasn't just about hiding a personal shame. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to maintain control, to pretend that kings and queens were somehow above the biological frailties that govern us all. But history shows that no secret can be kept forever. The ghosts of those who suffered in silence still haunt the corridors of power, a testament to the secret that could, and sometimes did, bring dynasties to their knees. If you found this look into history's hidden secrets fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories you were never told in school. And let us know in the comments, what other historical mysteries should we uncover next? Thanks for watching.